recent days, and I think you'll find things a little easier to use, but more about that later. Let me just start by showing you a little presentation that might be of interest to you. So what we're talking about here, as you can see from the background to this slide, are QR codes. And, you know, that's what the word means, quick response. So there's a good one for trivia nights, the meaning of QR, quick response. And it's got some remarkable history, as you will see as we get along. The QR code system was first invented in 1994 by this Japanese man for a company that you see. And he did it because he designed it because it was influenced by the pieces on a Go board. I don't know if you've ever played Go. I certainly haven't, but it's a very popular game in Japan, and the look of a QR code is very like one of those boards. He designed it so that it would track motor vehicle construction for high-speed component scanning. So when the bits went ripping by, it would be easily recorded by a QR code. So that's a long while back, 1994. It came to my attention maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I thought, oh, well, I don't think this is ever going to be much of a success, but of course, COVID has brought it right up to the front. So why has it got this funny shape? Well, if you look at this little diagram, it tells you a little bit about QR codes. I invite you, you can have a look at this later on by going to the website, but for your interest, every single one of those little marks means something. And they're easily programmed by somebody with a reasonable amount of ability. And if you look at that information, you can see there, it talks about the version information so that it knows which QR code we're talking about. If you look at 2 QR codes, they often look quite different. Some of them have more information than others. This one we're looking at the moment has got lots of information. So maybe you might like to have a bit of a look at that later. We don't get into it too far. There is a practice QR code provided by Services New South Wales. It's on our website. You can go to Services New South Wales and practice with that if you like. In fact, if you picked up your phone right now, and I don't want you to do it, and you pointed the phone in the way you'll be shown by Jim and by Lee, that would take you to the Services New South Wales page. The question you might ask me is, can I make my own QR code? And the answer is another day. We're not going to talk about it today. In fact, it's extremely easy to make your own QR codes, as trainer Peter has recently discovered. And in fact, I'm involved in a wine tasting group, which isn't a bad thing to be involved in. And in the early days of COVID, we used a QR code I'd made, and it registered people's names and lots of other information. So it's actually quite easy to do. In the COVID-19 pandemic, one we're currently still in, QR codes became the flavour of the month because it's touchless. But it also isn't just a matter of registering your name against some database, which up until recently was actually quite a dangerous thing, as you will see. It's also very useful to be able to show you a menu. I walked into a restaurant last Wednesday night in the city, a small Spanish restaurant, and there was one guy behind the bar, no menus, nobody asked anything, and everything was done with QR codes. So if you want to order a particular cocktail, you just pointed your phone at the QR code on the table and the cocktail turned up, and so on. So showing menus is a very useful thing because, as I'm sure you realise, handling a menu is in fact not a useful thing if somebody else has handled it before you. In several Australian states, in fact, all Australian states now require QR codes at shops and clubs and many other services. And I'm suggesting to you that probably we will see this continue long after we've got on top of the coronavirus situation. So I would think that probably there's a lot more to be seen for it. This is a very interesting story. I saw this on the Channel 7 News the other day. A family in New Zealand, the grandfather showed his son and said, So my phone is telling me that my phone is filled now with pictures. And of course, what you can imagine the story, he was taking photographs of QR codes and the phone was filled. Now, the golden rule, of course, is you don't take a photograph of a QR code. I remember when I first started doing it, I was taking photographs of QR codes. That, of course, is not what you need to do. In fact, it's not at all useful. What you need to do is point the phone at the QR code, and Jim and Lee will tell you all about that. So don't make the same mistake that Philemon Evuna, age 67, did, because we are of a similar age, are we not? So the Services New South Wales is the centre of what's happening now. This is the state government's department, which handles driver's licences and all the rest of it. And in particular, now they have their Services New South Wales QR code, which you will see absolutely everywhere. It is now compulsory for restaurants to display it, for example, and other service industries. And it is an extremely valuable tool. You don't need it. You don't need to have the app on your phone, but it's much better if you do. And certainly the others will be telling you about that. If you use the QR code reader to go to the Services New South Wales site, after the first time you've done it, you won't be asked any further questions. It knows who you are. And if you're going with a regular partner, it will remember their information as well. So you can walk into a restaurant, hold up your phone, point it at the QR code, and that's pretty much the end of it. You will have to press agree. But it's a fantastic, well-designed system. So if you don't have the New South Wales Services New South Wales app, which is free, you will download it from either the Play Store if you're an Android user, or from the Apple Store if you're an Apple user. Whilst you're there getting this app, you might like to install your digital driver's license if you haven't done so. It's a fantastic option, and it means you end up with two licenses, one on your phone and the physical one as well. So in my case, I carry the one around on my phone, but if I needed to, I could dig out the other one as well. If a business if you don't have a smartphone, and I think by look of the people who are attending this little talk, most of you are smart enough to have a smartphone, but if you don't, the business is required by law to have another system, not a written one. They need to have either a tablet or some other device where they can register you. Let's just talk very briefly about security with QR codes. Watch out, folks. There are a lot of malicious people out there, as you very well know. Be careful when you walk into a restaurant that you only use the QR code provided by Services New South Wales. A coffee last week at a little coffee shop, I went in, QR coded with the Services New South Wales on the way in. And when I got in there, there was another one on the table saying, if you want to read the menu, use this one. And they wanted to know my age, they wanted to know my gender. And of course, that is just something you shouldn't release that sort of information to anyone. So just don't accept people who try that. Be careful also when you walk in. Some places have got QR code, Services New South Wales, and right next door to it another one. Only use the Services New South Wales one. And if you do get taken on your phone to some page on the internet that you really don't think is appropriate, just simply close the app down or close down what you're doing and speak to the maitre d' and say there's something wrong here, and because there are a lot of nasty players out there. Don't give people any privacy information. In my opinion, you're best off just giving them the only things they require, which is your email address and your phone number. That's it. So I've come to the end of my little section. Now we've got Jim Carmichael, who's going to talk to us about Apple phones and how they use, which is what I have in fact. And Lee's going to talk to you about exactly the same thing, but this time with an Android phone. So I hope you found some benefit from that. Don't forget that you can very easily look at all this again on our website. Thanks very much, Jim.
Thanks, Paul.
Can you see my share screen, Jim?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is to run you through very briefly how to download the Service New South Wales app onto your Android phone, and then how to apply that in the real world. So just let me speak a little bit about the Android operating system first of all. It's owned by Google, and somewhere in excess of 80% of all mobile phones in the world use this particular operating system. In Australia, there's something like 60% of phones use this operating system, so it's relatively common and is mostly almost all phones that are other than iPhones use this operating system. Now you'll need an Android 9 or higher to scan QR codes with a built-in camera app. However, if you don't have a modern phone, and we're talking about phones probably since the middle of 2018, will be 9 or higher. But if you don't have a phone of that date, there are other ways of downloading apps, which I'm sure Jim will speak a little bit more about later on. But this presentation will also go up on the AVPAL site, so you can revisit this and run through it step by step later. Sufficient to say that there is a link there you can see on your screen above the various apps that you can click on, and you can go to this site where there are various apps that you can use to read QR codes. However, be very aware of the disclaimer across the bottom of the screen. It's important that you keep your security system very much up to date so that you ensure as much as possible that you don't download anything with a virus in it. So the COVID safe check-in, as we've discussed already, it's for participating COVID safe businesses using the COVID safe check-in. And if it were the fact that we were unfortunate enough to have another virus outbreak, you will be contacted by the contact tracers who are working on behalf of Service New South Wales, and you'll be contacted by phone so that you can take the necessary precautions. So how to set up the QR code on your phone. Now, this is in words, but we're going to do some pictures shortly so you can see how it actually happens. So you scan the QR code with your phone camera and the app's check-in page will automatically open. You enter your contact details and you can add dependents, as Jim said earlier. Oh, sorry, Paul said earlier. So if you're with an elderly companion or the grandchildren, you can add those to your check-in as dependents, and then they are covered by the security of this code as well. So you then select check-in, and a confirmation will appear on your phone when you have successfully checked in. So as we said, this operating system is owned by Google. So logically enough, you go through the various icons on your phone screen and find the one that is associated with the Play Store icon. You can see there the little triangular multicolored icon at the head of the yellow arrow. So you click on that, and that opens a different screen. Now, I've shown you two screens. One screen on the left-hand side is pretty much of a user who's been searching for apps, and on the right-hand side, that's what it will look like if you've been searching for games. So in that box at the top, which says search for apps and games, you click on that, and it automatically opens the next screen, which will look like this. Now you use the keyboard at the bottom of the screen to simply type in three letters, N, S, and W. What that does is then it opens the next screen, which gives you the option, or gives you a menu for the options of all of the apps that are related to the New South Wales government. The top one in the picture on your screen says NSW Service App. That is the one we want. So we click on that, and sorry, wrong button. Try that button. And it opens a screen looking something like this. So you see on the top right hand sector is a button that says install. So you tap on the install button and it downloads the Service New South Wales app. Now, the Service New South Wales COVID Safe app will require your contact details. It will require your name and your mobile phone number. And as we discussed before, if you have anybody else accompanying you who doesn't have a mobile phone and you want to add them as dependents, you can add them in a separate screen. It's necessary for you to scroll up and down on the screen sometimes to find all of this detail, because the screens on the phones are relatively small, and the screen detail that comes on these apps is relatively large and quite often too big for the screen to see it all at one time. So when the app is downloaded, you find on your telephone screen this icon here, which is the little stylized opera house, and you tap on that and it will open the screen that looks like the screen in the left-hand side of your screen you're looking at. You scroll down into the lower part of that screen, and you then find the screen at the icon at the top of the yellow arrow, and you tap on COVID Safe Check-in to scan the QR code. So as we've discussed before, we don't take a photograph of it, we just scan it. Now, as Paul mentioned too, the one thing that you'll find very, very useful is this practice code icon. Now, I have to tell you that the first time I tried to use the QR code, I was at Bunnings, and I was standing in front of the QR code poster, and I scanned the QR code, and I was very busy trying to put in all my details and clogging up the entrance to Bunnings. And I had a whole lot of very, very impatient tradies behind me wanting to scan their code. So what I would suggest to you is that when you're trying to get set up with this, use this as a practice check-in at home, which you can do by clicking on the link at the bottom of this page, and that will be up on the AVPAL site later today. So you'll see this poster around in quite a few places. You'll need to check in before entering our premises. So, as we've said, you go looking for this, which is the Service New South Wales poster, which has the QR code on it, and it should be on the entrance to premises that are using the COVID Safe Check-in. So look for that and beware of anything else. So as I've said, you find a COVID Safe poster with a QR code, then you tap on the Service New South Wales icon on your phone screen. You simply point the camera at the QR code, and you may have to tap on the word scan at the top of your screen. However, we have found that simply pointing the telephone camera at the QR code, it registers immediately. There's a small vibration in your phone to acknowledge that it has scanned the code, and that's all you have to do. When you enter a premises, you may have to show your green tick on the screen of your phone to a staff member as required. Now, all you have to do is to position your phone so that the QR code is visible on the screen, like the picture you have on your screen at the moment. So that's pretty much what it looks like. This picture shows you with a person holding their telephone. They just point it at the QR code and possibly touch the scan button, but it will probably scan it itself. Now, importantly, don't forget to check out. When you have been in a premise for some time and you are about to leave or you have left, you tap on the part of the screen at the head of the yellow arrow, which says last check in, and it then gives you the opportunity to scroll down with your telephone and check out of that particular place. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll take questions after Jim has done his presentation. Thanks, Jim.
We can't hear you, Jim. Jim, you're muted. Jim.
Yeah, find it. Thank you. Now, I think you should be seeing my screen. Are people seeing my screen?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, so we'll start off. I'm going to talk about iPhones and how to do it. On the screen, you'll see a little green arrow, and you will see the Service New South Wales app that Lee was referring to, and the Settings app. Now, before we actually look at using the app, there's a few little things that you have to be aware of for iPhones. For any iPhone later than iOS 10, there is actually scanning software built in, and it's associated with the camera. Older iPhones don't have that, and you may need then to use scanning software similar to the apps that Lee talked about for the Android phones. I've tested some of these scanning apps and they're pretty good. If you've got an iOS version older than iOS 9, however, I would suggest that you probably are not going to be able to find a good and reliable scanning app. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering how you know which version of iOS you got. So to find out, you can go to the Settings app on your iPhone. If we open that up and go to General, and then About, you'll find that iPhones tell you a software version, and you're looking for a number like this, which I've got 14.4, which is the latest version. But what I'm going to show you with the app, I can absolutely confirm works with 13, and for memory probably worked with earlier ones, but time passes. So worth checking which version of iOS you have. What I'm going to use for demonstration today is the New South Wales app. If you can use that, it is by far the easiest way to work. So There are, however, a couple of other quirks that you might have to consider. To make the scanning app work on an iPhone, you have to check that the camera has had scanning enabled. And you also have to make sure that you have mobile data turned on. So if we look at the scanning at the camera app, there's a switch there in the camera app which says scan QR codes. So for the iPhone to be able to scan them, you have to turn that switch on. Now, all new versions of software, I think, turn that on by default, but older versions might not be quite as effective. And the other thing which I mentioned there is mobile data. I had a friend who downloaded the app and found it still didn't work. And that was because he didn't have very much mobile data on his phone, and he had turned off mobile data for most things. So if you have a problem logging in on the app, you can always go to settings, go to mobile data, and make sure that that little switch is green. And you can even scan down and have a look and check that when you get to Service New South Wales app, which is turned on for it. And mine is, but I can't actually get my eye. There it is. Same symbol as before, and the switch is on. Okay, so how do we use it to log in? Well, as Lee said, we could point our camera at the code, at the QR code. There are two ways of doing it on an iPhone. The first way is you can open up the camera and just wave your camera in front of it. And you'll see on the screen there that there's a little yellow bit. You see I've missed it. As I move around, it loses it. But more importantly, up the top of here, there's a pop-up here said Open Service New South Wales. And if I touch that, it's going to take me over and open the Service New South Wales app. Now, at this point, you'll see I've been asked to put in a fingerprint to enter it. That's because I hold my driver's license in the app as Paul suggested, and so I have logged into my Service New South Wales account. But if you just want to use it for scanning the QR codes, you don't need to do that. So don't be put off by the logging in bit. And you see, apart from going past that step, I'm now at the point where I can log in. It's got my name, it's got my phone number, and all I have to do is click continue. I'm ready to check in. If I had a dependent, I can type it in now. Now I have a dependent called Joe. I can choose to remember it by clicking the box there. Hit next. Hit done. Oops. And once I've hit done, I hit confirm. Oh, wants a family name. And now I've got a dependent and I can check in. And because I've remembered my dependent, the next time I come to check in, I don't have to put the name in. All I do is tick the box beside them to say I want to check them in this time. And as Lee said, when you've been to a place and you're ready to leave, you should try and check out. And that's as easy as touching the checkout button, now button here, hitting confirm, and I'm checked out. So that was really, I think, quite easy. The other option, as Lee said, is you could simply open the Service New South Wales app and go and touch scan up here where my green button is. And from then on, I wave it at the code. It's remembered me. Here's my dependent. Do I want to check my dependent in? I'll do it this time. And I hit check in. And since I don't want to be left checked in, I'll check out again. And that's it done. So there we have the time it takes to check in. Now, one thing Lee mentioned on the way through was people get a bit impatient with you if you're standing at the code filling out information. Just be aware, of course, that once you've opened the app using the QR code, you can step away from the code because all the information that's needed has been handed to your phone, and you can do that offline and let the queue continue checking in. If you forget to check in, which I must confess that from time to time I do, you can always go back, open the app, scroll down till you see COVID safe check-in, and touch last check-in and check out. So pretty simple. I've tried a few of the check-in systems before, and my recommendation now is very much to use the New South Wales app, because that allows you to check in to New South Wales in the knowledge that you're not going to some site set up by someone, as Paul suggested, to get details about you. The other recommendation which I would make, if you're going to use QR codes, which we all have to, is be very careful if you're scanning with the camera to read the pop-up message and see what the QR code is instructing your phone to do. If it's something that you don't recognize, just stop at that point and don't carry on. Right, and as Paul said, if your phone won't log in properly and won't do things, venues are supposed to allow you to check in manually by giving them your details. Okay, at this point I might stop sharing my screen and we'll have questions now. I'm just having a little difficulty on my screen to see who. Does anyone want to ask questions of any of the three of us?